Today is the second part of a two-part series on confessions of resistance. There is such a book as called the Book of Confessions. Well, many of you may know that, with the from United Presbyterian USA. 12 confessions in there. 2 of them are really resistance confessions. In October, Jeff talked about the Barmen, the Barmen Declaration, which was written in 1934. It was a group of local German pastors resisting the Nazis as Hitler sought to control all aspects of human life, including the church. 34 years later, a group of South African pastors got together and wrote something called the Confession of Belhar. It was to formally address apartheid. Relevant today, certainly, as we face deep divisions, increasing racist rhetoric, steep inequalities. So our leader for today, again, is Jeff Doane. Most of you know him. The longtime pastor of Lincoln Park Church, where he was a much beloved pastor for a long time. Has been at Fourth Church in his retirement, where he's been one of our favorite teachers and discussion leaders. So let us begin with prayer. Lord, open our minds to a better understanding of what it means to be your disciples. Give us courage to follow you, trusting in the power you give us through your Holy Spirit. Amen.
Thank you, Fred. We depend on you for not only folk who are online, and we welcome you to this class, but also just a reminder, we are trying out this large oblong of chairs because I really appreciate discussion. I am hoping we get there. I'm going to lead us into that shortly. And there are a couple of different mics we can use. This one, and Jana has one in the back, and I think it's got her running shoes on ready for today. So please, when you want to make any kind of comment, if you'll wait for the mic, then you'll be heard both here and online. Couple things before we begin. I appreciate all the logistics. Jana and Matt decided we'd try the oblong of chairs, get rid of the tables. Sorry, it's more convenient for coffee and copies, but then we can't get as many chairs in. So you can register your opinions after today and let adult know. I'm on the Adult Ed Council too, and we keep wrestling to see just how this is all going to work. I am so pleased to see all of you who are here. And I realized coming into today that there are 2 or 3 people who are, and have been in the past, almost always here, who are not today. Peyton Randy Keller, we had a wonderful memorial service for Peyton. Catherine, it's splendid you're here this morning. And there are 2 other people who for the last 13 years have been commuting every Sunday to Fourth from Northwest Indiana. And the Reverend Dr. Leroy Fassett died 10 days ago. Leroy had had a long and rich life, but and he had done his own education in adult education, and he and his dear friend Marie would come well, she put it, anytime you're teaching, we'll be there. And I thought, that's serious loyalty. Thank you. So I'm lifting up Leroy and certainly Randy this morning as those who are within the realm of the saints, but not present with us here this morning. We are going to try and take on a lot in one class. So I will try and move us through. Has everybody got the handouts? There are 2 of them. Good. I'm going to encourage us just to briefly look at the ancient story of the Tower of Babel out of the book of Genesis. The first part of the book of Genesis is very interesting. Most scholars conclude that this is prehistorical. So Adam and Eve, Cain and Abel, and Noah, these are wonderful stories, but we don't have historic linkages for them. These are major stories with meaning. I use myth in a very powerful and positive way. And the Tower of Babel is one of them. The reason we're going to look at it is because it ended up shaping the whole structure of South African society after the Europeans arrived. Obviously, there had been numbers of indigenous tribes in South Africa for millennia. And it was just when the Dutch were in their peak of naval power and trade. They were trying to go around the Cape of Good Hope. They realized it'd be a lot better to stop, refuel, and so they'd better establish a place there. And this was done by the Dutch. And interestingly, they brought their own very conservative Christian approach to the church. So we're not going to read this. I'm going to violate all my own good standards for Bible study today. But I wanted you to have this in front of you because you can see how our ancient forebearers, trying to sort out why the world works the way it does, went to this story. You know, we have humans trying to reach up into the heavens to God, and we have ziggurats to this day as an example of that. And then you'll notice God is in the plural here, so there's some anticipation of the different persons of God. But they're a bit worried about this hubris of the human species. And so there is this declaration that we're going to scatter the people. We're going to keep them speaking only to each other in their own languages. And it became sort of, ironically for me, the gospel for the formation of the Dutch Reformed Church in South Africa. So they said, no, it'll just be whites in the Dutch Reformed Church, thank you. There were also, they needed work done, but they weren't comfortable working with the Xhosa or the Khoikhoi, who were the tribal groups around Cape Town. And so they brought in Malaysians and others from the East as indentured servants. And then what complicated the history and circumstance in South Africa is that later they brought in thousands of indentured servants from India, including Mohandas Gandhi, who spent 21 years trying to organize the oppressed people who came to be known as the colored people. Now, this is their history, not ours, so we have a hierarchy of racial categories. There were enough people who came directly from India that they had their own category, but then colored was any mixed blood which, as we know in the United States, is an extensive category of people. Most of us are mongrels of one sort or another. And then there was the Dutch Reformed Church of Africa, which was the Black Dutch Reformed Church. So we had 4 different Dutch Reformed churches based on this story, saying, we'll disperse people, you'll just speak to your own people. And the history was tough because they therefore had churches defined totally on racial descent. And I'm saying that because those words come up very clearly in Belhar. So it's intriguing to me, the literal power of a text, and it's evident utter contrast with the gospel of reconciliation. So when we get to Belhar, you'll see how they're addressing it specifically. I'll talk another few minutes and then we'll get into this. But Belhar actually had its beginnings in a seminary classroom. A professor said to his students, I've heard all of your great political, sociological, anthropological critique of apartheid, the Afrikaner word for apartness, separateness. He said, I want to hear your theological critique of that. Very appropriately. And that was the beginning of the effort that ended up with this draft. There were 2 professors who did a lot of work to get the first draft out there, and then it went to their synod. But this is coming from the Dutch Reformed Mission Church, which is the colored church of the 4 Dutch Reformed churches in South Africa. And before the end of apartheid, they got the Dutch Reformed Church in Africa on board, the black church. They invited the white church, and they said, by no means, because they had created apartheid. I was struck in Camille's sermon this morning, the utterness of certainty. They decided they would grab this text and be powerfully certain about what God intended. There was no discussion of other texts. This was it. And so it's a huge example of part of what she was pointing to through the quotation she was using this morning. I would like to move us now right into Belhar, but with that brief beginning, it would be important for me to ask if there are questions or comments before we move into Belhar. Just trying to give you some background of a very complex situation. I have been fortunate to travel to South Africa back in 2002 on my sabbatical. Gretchen was able to come with me and our daughter Leah. And it was powerful because we were in the township of Guguletu, which is right outside of Cape Town. And the only way to experience the differing worlds of South Africa, we were staying in luxury in Cape Town. We would get in a van and head out about 45 minutes and come into the township where there was a powerful witness from the J.L. Swanee Presbyterian Church. Some people from Forth have been there on their trip to South Africa. I had the privilege to preach there while we were there and was translated simultaneously into Xhosa by Spiwo Kapile, who was the pastor. And in fact, he asked me to come back for a month when I retired. Unfortunately, my health constrained that, but it was an amazing place. And the only instruments were foam pads, and it was the most spirited singing of any place I have ever been. So that alone was worth the visit. Questions or comments? Let's make sure we are going to look at 3 major themes in Belhar, and it's organized pretty clearly that way, so I'm just taking us through from top to bottom. And it's important just to keep in mind who was writing this. These are folks on the margins in a very hierarchical, utterly racist society. Not to say that ours is not that. It's painful on a visit to realize how much we can begin to see similarities. That was a deep pain that I brought back with me. But keep in mind who is constructing this. There are scriptures on the side. Thank you, Jana, for that choice. As Presbyterians, we believe that the confessions help us interpret the scriptures in our living as disciples. So that gives a clue where else you can reach if you're saying, what are they referencing here? So I also apologize if you're hearing some electronic sounds. My insulin pump is not working well this morning, so please just ignore it. We have a very standard and understandable first paragraph here. Clearly, belief in the triune God, but it's very interesting and different language from many of the confessions. It seems more personal/communal at the same time. So if you look at it, God who gathers, protects, and cares for the church. And, through the Word and Spirit, from the beginning, and God will do to the end. It's intriguing to me that we look at verbs here because they give us a sense of the character. While this is certainly substantially intellectual, it is very personal and powerful. And I was struck when people appeal to unity, I sort of think, well, yeah, duh. What an entitled person I am that I can respond that way. If you're sitting in the middle of things, of course you can assume, well, we all ought to be unified. If you've been displaced into a separate church, then unity is very controversial. Back to the Tower of Babel. You can keep that right over here while you're looking at this. So this is a real critique of everything that shapes not just church, but society at that time. And too painfully still to this day. I will follow up my comment on they're looking at unity as both a gift and an obligation. So, yes, it's a gift, but unity is what we are to be about as the church. If there are separations, this is building a very strong case that separations and separateness is sin. Unity critiques that, and they'll do this further as we get into the discussion of reconciliation in the second section. But the verbs, it's in the fourth point there. If we listen to how the verbs speak to us, we experience, practice, and pursue community with one another. And then it comes back, and we are obligated to one another, that we share one faith, and then there's one faith, one calling, this central impetus of the gospel. I've talked to some people as they've started to read this and wondered just quite what to make of this, and it became so clear to me, it depends on our perspective. And if we're sitting in the center, we can take unity for granted. If we are outsiders, we have to give our lives to seek it and to be part of it. The other thing that struck me, and then I want to see if you have comments about language or about this section, is that they set up very helpful tensions. You've got gift obligation, you've got mutual service and the enrichment of the one visible people of God. Again, words we might not think of using. Visible. Well, if you're arguing beyond racial divides, then you've really got to make the case. You don't just say, well, this is what God intended. You go back to your church. We'll keep ours. And I say this in some pain because the Presbyterian Church in the United States of America is, to this day, 92% Euro-American. The other thing that I wanted to say, this wonderful book of Confessions, which I would love us to study a lot more in the Presbyterian Church. We whip officers through it quickly, and then we don't do much else with it. But after this morning, we said the Apostles' Creed, which is actually the second oldest of the creeds. The Nicene Creed came first when they were struggling to figure out just who Jesus and God were in relationship. And the Apostles was created for adult baptisms, because that's the only kind they did then. And it took the first 10 centuries. And then we leap ahead to the Reformation, and there are all kinds of strangely worded ones in there, including with heavy words against the papists, our Roman Catholic sisters and brothers. Thank you. So we don't take the scriptures literally, nor do we take the confessions literally. So just a reminder as we're in here. But everything, it started, of course, in that portion of the Middle East, then into Europe. There are 2 confessions here that come from this country. First, in 1967, there's a powerful confession of racial reconciliation, which begins to talk about justice. When we get to the third section, you'll see this is the first time the Reformed tradition was talking about justice. Took that long. The other one is a brief statement of faith, which we finally got approved in the early 90s after we got the northern and southern branches of our church. After the Civil War, it only took till 1983 to get that accomplished. So my favorite phrase, like a giant tortoise moves the church of God. So, but are there comments on the use of unity here or the language you're experiencing in this affirmation? We'll do the next two sections, but. Yes, Jude.
Thank you. Was all of this confession written at the same time? And then another question I have with the Nelson Mandela being arrested, and where does this fit in to that history of South Africa?
Very good questions. It started in that classroom discussion, and then later two of the professors took some of that discussion and later discussions and came up with a draft, which then went to the Synod of the Dutch Reformed Mission Church. It happened that there was someone who became very well known who was part of those discussions. His name was the Reverend Alan Bosak. He became president of the World Alliance of Reformed Churches at the time Belhar was coming out. So suddenly there was visibility to this document. But it evolved, as confessions often do, through several years. And we Presbyterians are never willing to say, just once agreeing is good enough. You got to have votes. You have to have a vote of the General Assembly. You have to have a vote of a second General Assembly. And then you have to have a vote of, it's 2/3 or 3/4. 2/3, that's what I recall. Thank you, Roger. I knew I'd have good help right in this room. 2/3 of the presbyteries. So if you're thinking this is first approved in 1986, would anyone like to guess when our church approved it? 2016. It first went to the presbyteries. It went to General Assembly, and they got all excited and said, oh, yes, we approve it. And then it went out to the presbyteries, and 8 presbyteries, and I believe I'm correct, they were all Southern presbyteries, said no. So it had to stop and go back in the process. So part of my answer to you, Chit, is it's complex. It was classroom discussion. Then many of the pastors and elders were drawn in. Then there was 2 major authors. Then it went to the Synod. And thanks to Alan Bosak being such a visible worldwide leader, it then got passed in Belgium. It got passed in Canada. We were the caboose, just to put it bluntly. Did I miss any other parts of your question, Jude? What happened is they never expected to see the day of Mandela's release or his being elected. This was a witness that they took on sacrificially. Russell Brotman, one of the 2 authors, was arrested, imprisoned, and tortured for his role in theologically questioning apartheid. And they weren't expecting to see that day. It ended up happening, and for those of you who tracked this in the 90s, very quickly. And because first there were going to be conditions for Mandela's release, he refused. Then that Afrikaner leader died. The next one stepped in and said, we need to get this done now. And so agreed to release Mandela. So this is coming after the construction of Belhar. So for Belhar, they're still facing the rigidity of apartheid. Great questions, though. Sorry. And thanks, John, for the reminder on that. Any other questions or comments here on the unity section?
Can I make a comment? I just wanted to
Nope,
share
nope.
something.
You,
No?
here.
That's all right. No, that's
No.
all right.
No.
Oh. No, I just wanted to share something. In the 80s, I met a couple of doctors. I'm a retired physician, and one of them was, they both met in medical school in South Africa. One was, a white person. The other one was, the woman was from southern India, and she was black. And when they were in medical school in South Africa in the 80s, he was bringing her home in the car, and the police stopped them because blacks and whites were not supposed to be driving together. I just wanted to share that, how bad it was. That's why they came to the United States, where they could get married.
Oh, yeah. Interracial marriage, absolutely not as under apartheid. Thank you, because that also points this out. For anyone who was not totally white, you carried a passbook, and if you were stopped and you didn't have it, you were arrested. It's things that are hard for us to imagine, but they were very true and brutal, and that's a great way to do that. Are there other questions or comments here? Let's move to the section on reconciliation. Excuse me, what I want to do here, just put it in, right? The reason that this confession is structured the way it is they purposely formed it in the model of Barmen. So it says, we believe, and then if you'll look, therefore we reject any doctrine. And I want us to look carefully at that point. This is the first of the therefore we reject sections. You've got the scriptures, but we don't have the same numbering, so I'm going to leave you to find that. But look at the interesting language here. Again, you're looking for unity. And so there's a rejection, and we're coming. This was written in Afrikaans. So this is a translation into English, and we all know that can leave us in some interesting places on words, which absolutizes either natural diversity or the sinful separation of people. And look at that, sinful separation. They're just ways of speaking of each other. And that this hinders or breaks the visible and active unity of the church. It is one thing to sit here as we do every Sunday morning. It's quite another to get in a gathering of even the Reformed tradition from all over the world. And suddenly you look around and can recognize our diversity, but it isn't a diversity that separates. And I would say we're in a very painful point as a country here when we're trying to deny the diversity that enriches and suggests that it be dealt with separately. I'm hopeful that we will get maybe at least 10 minutes at the end to say, what did we learn from here and how would we write the Confession of Chicago? And say what we affirm and what we reject. Just a little teaser, so you might be thinking about that. I was also struck on the fourth point under the rejection, which explicitly or implicitly maintains that dissent or any other human or social factor should be a consideration for membership in the church. You may think about when we welcome new members to our congregation, there is fundamentally one question they're asked, and it's about their trust in Jesus Christ as their Lord and Savior. And it's so clear, and it emerges out of the experience of churches, even in our own country, where most of the southern branch of our denomination were white. The black members in the South mostly attended the northern branch churches that were in the South. So it's a learning right close to our own experience, and that's why I think Belhar is a crucial confession to attend to. I would like to hear us one of these Sundays in worship not only use Belhar, but use sentences from the rejection so that we know it's not just we politely affirm whatever is there. We have to say no to something to say yes to something. And I think that's a powerful message of Belhar and Barmen, but I'm not on the staff anymore. That'll be up to them to figure out. So, although I do serve on the Worship, Music, and the Arts Council too, so we may do a little good trouble there. We'll see. Let's move to the next we believe that's listed, and it's the message of reconciliation. I'll point out a couple of things. I want us to look at the language. And this one moves quickly. It's got a lot of content, so I encourage that you read the whole thing. But it fundamentally distills the gospel of Jesus Christ as the message of reconciliation. You will find that's the major theme of the Confession of 1967, should you ever decide to come into possession of one of these good books, half of our Constitution. Yes, you can. So you don't have to wait and get all that paper. You can just go in and get that because it emerged not very imaginatively named, but at least we know when it happened. The Confession of 1967 was coming out of the racial turbulence of the 60s for Presbyterian churches in this country. So there's an echo between our struggles here and then what was happening with our South African neighbors in Belhar. They point out the tensions in this section, and this goes back to the question about Mandela and the end of apartheid. And this is in the third point under we believe. It's basically a rejection that they allowed to creep into the affirmation. This becomes interesting. They'll start saying, well, we believe this. Oh, and by the way, before we get to the rejection, we've got to reject that too. And, which is proclaimed in a land which professes to be Christian, but in which the enforced separation of people on a racial basis promotes and perpetuates alienation, hatred, and enmity. For very good reason, they weren't holding back. We're learning that we better take on the deep structural racism of our own time much more confrontively. I think with our own Racial Equity Council, there have been learnings that we need to hear, actions we need to take. So they were assuming that they might end up the rest of their lives under apartheid. But they didn't assume that then they had to adjust to apartheid. They were willing to challenge it, and at great risk, as it turns out. And this ends with a very brief rejection. Again, anything that obstructs and weakens the ministry and experience of reconciliation in Christ. I can't quite imagine what it would have been like to worship in the Dutch Reformed Church, the white church, if this chapter from Genesis undergirds everything. What did they do with Jesus' ministry? So it would have been very interesting to talk with those people. In our 2-week stay, we were in 2 different townships, which in Guguletu just, there is no sanitary infrastructure. You walk down the street or around the corner to get water. There are wonderfully maintained rudimentary homes, and the great medical clinic they had was built inside a shipping container. So life there radically different, and this is emerging. Belhar is on the other side of the international airport in Cape Town from Guguletu, but it's another of the townships. This wasn't representatives coming as our church does, where you're staying in hotels and meeting in conference centers. This was coming out of the nitty-gritty of life that they experienced. We've got one section more, and I want to get there because the Reformed churches had what they called the basic tenets, and they had to do much more theological words, but justice was not one of them. And so this was the first time for our Reformed relatives in the faith that they talked about God as a God of justice. And that was part of the reason our neighbors in Belgium and some of the churches in Canada, and yes, the Dutch Reformed Church that's based in Holland, Michigan, adopted this years before the Presbyterians did. But this was their first chance to lay hold of the deep convictions of justice. And you'll also notice, if you're looking at the scriptures, a slight change in the sources of the scriptures. Suddenly we've got, Leviticus, you've got love of God, love of neighbor, where Jesus reached for a summary of the law. Then you've got the prophets, Micah, Amos, Jeremiah, Isaiah. So the biblical work is rooted powerfully, and in our tradition, we've never believed that, well, we don't worry about the Old Testament. That's, we're just the New Testament is fine. No. Both testaments are fundamental to our identity. And that's why it's great to have the prophets make their entrance here for our relatives who are part with us in the Reformed tradition. And if you look at the list, it is extremely powerful. It is New Testament as well as Old. You can check the sources just to confirm that. And it is a very brief rejection. In fact, let's read it together, because it's just 2 lines. Sorry, without numbers here. Can you find that at the end of this?
Top of the last page.
I am using a different copy than you're using. Sorry.
So which one are we going to read? Leviticus
Therefore-
or Isaiah?
No, what we're going to read is the therefore we reject. Top of the last page. Yes. Thank you.
Oh, there we go. Thank you.
Let's just read the lead in and that. Therefore, we reject any ideology which would legitimate forms of injustice and any doctrine which is unwilling to resist such an ideology in the name of the gospel. Basically, they were saying to their Dutch Reformed Church neighbors, nope, you've got it wrong. We are not going to stand with you. It was prophetic because finally, at the end of apartheid, the World Alliance of Reformed Churches would only welcome the Dutch Reformed Church when they officially repented of apartheid and confessed that they had been wrong. And that's why this rejection becomes so important. So. A lot in a short time. I want to get to questions or comments, and then I'm going to try and see if we can name what we might have learned if we were to be those who were drafting a Confession of Chicago. Yes, we'll get a microphone to you here. Whoa. Speedy Chaina's on her way to you. Marilyn.
In present-day South Africa, what is the persistence of segregation in the churches? I mean, are there still just completely white separatist congregations? What's the status today?
That's a very good question, and I'm not going to be able to give you a satisfactory answer. When we were there in 2002, they were just beginning to live their way in. We were predominantly worshiping in the townships, which are almost exclusively black. We did not end up worshiping, and this was because of contacts with the so-called colored church or Dutch Reformed Mission Church, because it had combined with the black, and so but the white churches were slower getting on board, no question. They'd been invited several times, and then residential patterns are still horribly separated. I had always wanted to go back, haven't had a chance. Has anyone in the room been to South Africa recently?
Choir tour in 2018.
Yes. Do you have any memories from that, Roger?
When the choir would be in a concert type of environment with the other churches were totally black.
Okay. Part of this is that it's the townships who are welcoming people. The reason Spiwo Kapile said to me, I want a month of your time, is we were traveling with two wonderful mission workers from the United States who had spent 2 years as white individuals, faithful Presbyterians, with Spiwo and his congregation, trying to model that same unity that we have here. You know, that's where we're headed. But it is a long and slow road, as we know, painfully in the city of Chicago.
What's some additional reading that you would suggest after hearing about this topic?
There is a wonderful piece that's about 8 pages long. Gretchen, you found this one. Was it on the website of the PCUSA? Jack Rogers was a superb theologian. He was moderator of our denomination, and Jack has since died. In fact, the piece that he writes, he laments at the end. What would these people think? That we haven't been able to adopt this yet as a Presbyterian church. So if you would look under Jack Rogers and Belhar, that's what I would suggest. I have used Jack's work on almost all my work on the Confessions. So thank you for that question. And let me know if you come up with some other good sources too. Go, Ted.
What else was going on with, I think of Bishop Tutu being involved, Anglican, other denominations? What was the interplay with the Reformed churches?
Because of the strong leadership out of the Dutch Reformed Mission Church and then the Dutch Reformed Church of Africa, which was black, they were very much involved with Anglican neighbors in the whole process of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And so there was strong ecumenical ties. Again, I would have loved to have experienced them more with more time than I had. But they were strong, and they weren't needing to do their own thing. So the Anglicans were welcoming of Belhar. They didn't adopt it because they've got a different structure and polity, but yeah. Questions or comments? Oh, yeah, Larry, good.
I believe that currently now that for immigration, that U.S. is giving preferential treatment to white Afrikaners coming to the country. And so, I don't know what the numbers are, but it's interesting in whether they will interact in any way with Dutch Reformed churches and have any impact on policy.
It is a very strange set of affairs. The white nationalist Christian movement has distinct influence with our president. Elon Musk's mother is a right-wing leader in South Africa. She's a member of the fascist party there. So that's the kind of influence that's going on where this is being cited. I think it's utterly ridiculous if you look at the centuries of oppression that we're now worried about the white folk. But I promise not to say more there. I have run by some of my time limits, but I want to make sure if there are questions or comments, they get in.
By the way, is
Okay.
Peter Thiel also South African, who's so influential on J.D. Vance?
I do not know that, Ted, so we'd have to check that out. John.
Interestingly enough, I have read on the web just a few days ago that some of the white South African people that have migrated to the U.S. have turned around and gone back because they're scared by the gun violence in our country.
Powerful comment, John. Thank you. Something else we need to attend to much more actively. We won't do it this morning, I promise, but we don't have as much time at all. Sorry about too much more on Belhar. If there is one thing that we could say and feel that we need to say we reject about our current circumstances, are there people who could give a quick word on that?
Yeah.
I'm not saying you have it crafted. I just want an idea.
I think we need to reject the rejection of diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Thank you. Good.
I have one question to all of us. How many of us regularly socially mix with races of another origin, particularly the African American and the white? I don't see much of that in my social world. But it's a question I have for all of us.
And it's a question we should carry with us.
I think the problem lies there.
It is true, and if we take Belhar seriously, that's the challenge to unity. We can't just hang out with our own kind, shall we say. Gail?
Thank you. So this for me is very interesting because I grew up on the West Side. I was there when Martin Luther King was there, and it makes me very sad. And I guess because of the life that I lived on the West Side, it's hard for me to understand how people can be so cruel to each other. And a lot of those people are white, and of course there are some
Yes.
people that are black, and I don't know what to say. I feel like my whole lifetime is like, it has been in a movement of, for me, like for the good, and that, and for everybody. And it's really, I don't want to say it's simple, but it is. If people could be nice to each other.
We have a huge amount of work to do. If we get the mic down to Catherine. The racetrack.
Hi, brief comments. First, I want to say I think Gail is an exceptional person who lives out what we're talking about. Secondly, I feel when I have seen the different races mix, I think we forget to say that many times it's on the basis of class. Where I've seen people, black and white together, have usually been middle and upper middle class educated people. And there's not only it's really not good. There's not only a race difference, there's a lot of class stratification, and a lot that black people and people like myself who were raised on the other side of the tracks have to do to fit in. So it's a really tough, even in terms of communication. The classes have different ways of communicating, and I'm hoping we can figure out ways of getting better about these things. But just the way Chicago is set up, it's almost impossible.
Carol, can you pass this to Roger? I was trying to short circuit.
It may sound a little bit trite, but put more music in your life.
That was great. Thank you.
Well, with the hour,
Just one. Well, that's why I like this church. Like, I always go to the meal service on Sunday night supper, and there we have people from all different levels, and that's one of the things this church does. It opens its arms in the discarded and the people can come here and feel community and feel welcome and interact with all the different classes.
Good. Thank you.
Jeff, the hour is up. I think we all want to express our appreciation for all the background work, your personal experience, bringing to Belhar, and then making it relevant for us. And so much appreciation. Thank you.
Thank you all.